Hello everyone, my name is Grant Twyman, and I'm the Equity and Inclusion Program Manager here at Clover Park School District. For those that don't know me, my office is down at Student Services Center, and administratively, it's out of the Office of the Superintendent. We created this course entitled it Teaching Students During Civil Unrest for Summer Institute in the 2020-21 school year. We've received overwhelmingly positive feedback about this session. Our time today will be both challenging and encouraging. One of the most unique and inspiring components of this course will be the opportunity to hear from our students. One of the things that I've already concluded after hearing this clip over a dozen times is that our students are full of intelligence, brilliance, depth, perspective, and insight that we need. We'll spend about 20 minutes hearing from the students as they dialogue about the current events and what they want from teachers and staff in their schools. I'll start and stop the student dialogue portion and add comments and discussion as we move along this presentation. Before we begin, I'll just cover 4 course objectives really quickly. The first is we'll explore the concept of mirrors and windows. And really we'll introduce this. And this will be a concept that you'll hear me use all throughout this presentation and then even all this school year. We were able to introduce this at the Administrative Leadership Retreat back in early August. And so we'll refer to it a lot. It's incredibly important. And just as a quick review, kind of quick introduction, think of the mirror as the capacity to be self-reflective and to spend time doing self-evaluation. Or in other words, organizational evaluation or organizational reflection. It's not the time to blame others or even look to other people or other things for what we see. The mirror time, that mirror work is when you get to take some time to see your beliefs, your biases, your preferences, and even your practices and habits. It's healthy and necessary for all of us to grow to spend time looking in the mirror. And at times, it may even be uncomfortable to see certain sides or parts of yourself. Don't look away. Discomfort is not a negative feeling or emotion, and I love that in Clover Park School District, we haven't put discomfort in the negative category. We see discomfort as an opportunity to be honest about the reality that we're in and to pursue growth. It's an opportunity to do things differently. And then the window, right? Think of the window as this capacity or opportunity to look through to another perspective, another worldview, to hear another experience, and even other opinions of different people. Course objective number 2, we'll facilitate the window experience essentially by inviting our students into our dialogue, into our session, right? They'll share their opinions, their perspectives, right? Their time of self-reflection and how they're feeling about the current events, right? So we'll spend some time facilitating that window as we incorporate the student dialogue portion. And then course objective 3, we'll spend some time doing the mirror work. And I have a slide that's titled self-reflection. On that slide, particularly, make a note, screenshot it, take a picture, whatever you need to do. Because it's a lot on that slide, but really good for you to just spend some time, not just once, but in an ongoing, continuous fashion, doing some self-reflection, and then even some organizational evaluation. And then our course objective number 4, we'll discuss some practical steps to navigating the quote-unquote minefield. Sometimes folks are afraid to take a step or afraid to say something because it can feel like you're walking in a minefield. Sometimes you feel unsure where you will step, especially when we start talking about the civil unrest that we see, when we start talking about race, when we start talking in depth about equity, inclusion, and even justice, right? It could feel like a minefield where you don't quite know where to step and you don't want to cause an explosion to bring harm on yourself or harm on someone else. And so you freeze. And then this paralysis grips you. And in this session, we'll give you some tools and some principles of wisdom to navigate the metaphorical minefield. That'll come at the end of our time today. Some opening thoughts. When it comes like the civil unrest that we have seen in the last couple of months has been unlike any movement in our lifetime. And for many reasons, we must figure out how to discuss it and how to engage our students about it. We can't avoid it. We can't shy away from it. We can't be disengaged. Students are not disengaged. They are not ignoring it. They are hearing it, seeing it, feeling it, and talking about it. And if we don't, we run the risk of being completely irrelevant. And we only confirm what some students, and honestly what a lot of our students suspect, that this whole classroom, this this school, it's irrelevant. We had led about a dozen listening sessions last year, myself and the superintendent, and we got a chance to hear from a cross section of students from each of the high schools and some of the middle schools, and a through line and a theme from every session. And these weren't students talking to each other, right? There was no crosstalk. A through line and a theme in almost every session was this feeling from our students like school's irrelevant, like this is not preparing them for the adult world. It's not preparing them for life as an adult, to engage well after high school. And so that's a suspicion that they have. Like, is this really preparing us? Is it really preparing me for life after high school? They wonder if we don't engage, if we think we can shy away, we are confirming that suspicion. And as adults, we know it's not true. We know the things that we do are incredibly relevant to life after high school. Being able to make those connection points and being able to weave in current events to really show our students that we support and we care about the things that they're thinking about and going through, that's incredibly vital. And so we're obliged to engage, right? And not obliged in that it's a law or policy, but on a relational level, we are obliged. And in the sense of being emotionally intelligent and socially aware, we must engage, or we run the risk of being irrelevant. And the current environment is very tense, and there isn't a lot of grace out there. I've said this before. There's not a lot of room to swing and miss. And I've also said, if you're going to swing and miss, you're better off not swinging, right? In terms of approaching and engaging in the conversations around race, justice, and civil unrest. There's not a lot of room to swing and miss. But at the same time, if we don't swing, we confirm what they suspect, that school is irrelevant, or worse, we are indifferent or apathetic, or we agree with the injustice. And so it's a current paradox, right? And that's that third bullet here, just kind of opening thoughts. This paradox, well, we can't afford to swing and miss, so maybe we shouldn't swing. But if we don't swing, we don't want to communicate that message either, right? Because in some ways, silence is consent, right? And so what do? We have to engage. We have to be in the game. We have to do something. We have to say something. And so one of the goals in this session is to help you navigate the current environment and teach effectively. And the reality is, I believe wholeheartedly that if we don't get this right, we could throw our classroom management strategies in the garbage. Your students are looking for someone that they can trust, not an expert, but leaders and teachers that are humble and whose care and compassion is backed up by a willingness to learn and understand them. Your students are looking for relational connections, and they learn best from adults they can trust. And so in a way that is kind of a paradigm shift for some of us, we should be working, growing, and aiming to be followable. We should be working to earn the right to lead and teach this generation. On the topic of civil unrest and protest, the district has been processing the events, and we've rolled out some communication in a variety of platforms, written as well as video. And to summarize really quickly, here's where we've been, and here's how we've been processing it. We grieve the tragic murders of George Floyd, Sandra Bland, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Manuel Ellis, Saeed Hoquin, and many others. These tragedies reflect our nation's long history of racism and injustice. We say murders specifically because these individuals did not just lose their lives, they didn't just die, they were murdered. And for some, the investigation into their deaths are still underway, so the term murder may be presumptuous. And we're not a legal body or have any adjudication authority or processes, right, in these instances. But it's the current way we are processing them. And more importantly, we acknowledge that these events are not isolated. They're not just, I'll say it this way, they are part of past and present reality for the African American community. And while many of us are experiencing a range of emotions as we process these events and their impacts, we have to acknowledge the unique impact it has on our African American staff, students, and families. And some people are just waking up to these realities. Here's the other truth. Some have been dealing with it for a long time. So we state that these events magnify existing societal fractures and deep pain. And so sometimes the assertion that it's causing division or it's breaking down our society, in another way, it's revealing, it's uncovering those societal fractures and pain that already exist. And so with regards to protests and civil unrest, we recognize communities are coming together to protest racially biased policing against African Americans, protest systemic racism, and to demand change. We support the constitutional right for people across our nation to protest injustice. Looting and violence, this is not the focus of the conversation. Really quickly, the looting and the violence that you see or the destruction that you see, a lot of times it serves as a diversionary tactic or distraction from the main focus and the main point of the movement. And so we don't support participating in diverting or distracting from this movement. And you can do that by looting and being destructive, which we don't support, or you can divert and distract by spending your time talking about looting and destruction, which we don't support that either. And so we're not going to support diversion and distractions and deterrence from the main purpose of this movement by talking about it or participating in it. And so we say looting and violence, this is not the focus of the conversation.
What are your thoughts on civil unrest, the protests, and everything happening in your city, your country, and the world?
All right. My thoughts on the protests and civil unrest that's going on in our cities right now is I'm all for it, and I think it's great that, racism is like getting a bigger spotlight now in our generation. I mean, it's always been around, but I'm glad to see that like the Black Lives Matter protests and all the protesting and just really just making the situation and making the problems more aware. And not only that, but getting justice, like getting justice for the people who are affected by racism and police brutality. So yeah, protesting is great.
But I also think that the protests are really good because as she said, like we're continuing to see a pattern, and I just feel like this was like the wake-up call for it all. Like everybody's really starting to see what's going on, and they're realizing it's just something that it needs to stop.
My thoughts is I think overall it's great. I love seeing like people my age going out and protesting. Like Nico said, racism is like, it's been a big part forever. And I love, after the George Floyd situation, the Breonna Taylor situation, that, people are like giving a bigger push to end racism and stuff.
I think it's great. We're just like, we're kind of giving like racism a voice now. We're fighting, we're having those hard conversations. We're fighting for what's right.
So I really just feel like it's really nice to see people coming together. I mean, I know that things like rioting they're not easy to see and they're not easy to hear about because nobody likes to see like violence, obviously. But it's good to see people becoming more like increasingly aware of the systems that were built and like the ways that like just taking like the police system for example, it's just nice to see people becoming more and more aware about how our systems were built and the fact that they were built on the oppression of minorities, and just like coming from like a non-black person of color who like obviously passes as white, like it's interesting to also to see the way that our peers are reacting to it and seeing the ways that like my friends and other people's friends are reacting to and coming in support of it. So it's really nice to see.
I think that the amount of unrest and the protests that we have going on right now are all overdue actions and are all necessary. And I think that the way that our communities are responding to some of the issues that we have been faced with look the way that they do now because we are tired of years and years of the same story and the same tragedy. And I think that these protests and this unrest is finally going to be the spark to create the change that we have been waiting to see.
And so when you think about what's happening in our nation, in cities and in our communities, what institution is under the most scrutiny right now? Many answers may come to mind. The answer for me rises to the top. The institution under the most scrutiny in our nation is local law enforcement and police departments. And we are already seeing major shifts and reforms in police departments in major cities as a result of institutional flaws and failures that have been on public display. And the wording there is important. It reminds me of a quote that Will Smith said recently. Racism isn't getting worse, it's just getting filmed, right? And so the institutional flaws are now becoming more public, and as a result, we're seeing some shifts, we're seeing some changes, we're seeing some reforms being discussed, specifically around police brutality, racially biased policing, qualified immunity, and then even what public safety should and could look like, which again is not a new subject. And before I continue, let's make a quick note as a disclaimer, highlight this, underline it, circle it, put a star on it. I am not saying all cops are bad, and I am not saying eradicate police departments. And even when you hear or see headlines or chants calling for defund the police, they are not saying eradicate the system of policing. The real conversations that are happening in boardrooms with City Hall, City Council, police chiefs, and many others, the real conversations are about really about investing and divesting. And it's this idea, I'll say it this way, it's about reallocating resources to properly and appropriately meet the needs of the community. It's divesting from systems of punishment because those systems are not creating safer communities. And instead, it's a conversation about investing in the programs and systems and institutions that actually create safer communities. So those are the real conversations happening. So when you hear defund the police, it's the phrase, right, is intentionally incendiary, right? Like it's for sure a phrase to make you perk up, right? Kind of raise your eyebrow. And as we all do that, lean in, ask more questions, get in the game before you lob cheap criticisms at a thing, right? Let's find out more about it, and you'll really see that the conversations and the frame is about investing and divesting to usher in a new form or a new era of public safety. A lot more to say about that, but we don't have the time. Here's another kind of truth to consider. What I'm saying is, when a cop kills an unarmed white person, it's a tragedy. But when a cop kills an unarmed black person, it's a tragedy that reminds us of the horrific accounts of slavery and Jim Crow. To ignore that fact or to not consider it only indicates how far removed a person is from historical context, present reality, and that eerie correlation that exists between the past and the present. So as a result of a movement to confront racial injustice, institutional injustice, and inequality, major reforms are already underway in many cities. I don't think things will ever be the same. Change is happening. Is more change needed? Absolutely. In many ways and in many areas. Now for us, right, if the institution of law enforcement and police departments are under the microscope right now, who's next? I think public education is next. So what will the microscope with the dial turned to equity, inclusion, and justice reveal about the education system in our country? What will it reveal about the Clover Park School District, right? If you took the microscope and you turned the dial or the lens to equity, inclusion, justice, what will it reveal? And maybe more specifically, we could think about some areas like our hiring practices, our curriculum, right? Does our staff reflect the demographics of our students? Does our curriculum, does it serve as a mirror for students to see themselves? Does our hiring practices reflect the demographic of our students? Is it just? In terms of curriculum, does it serve as a mirror for students to see themselves reflected rather than a window? Right, the window is important sometimes for students to see through, right, to another world, another experience, another heritage, but also how much of it is a mirror where they get to see their heritage, right, their history, their demographic reflected. What will it reveal about our pedagogy? What is our teaching style? Are we culturally relevant? Our models of intervention, our discipline data, our classroom culture, and our teacher and staff biases. At this time, I want to bring the students in to hear from them and how they discuss some of the things around civil unrest.
What role does your teacher or school play in what's happening? So where do you see your school and your teachers in this right now? What role do they play?
So I think that, of course, because teachers, I feel like, to me, they're like disconnected from reality, and like, when I go into a classroom, I don't expect to be talking about like real world situations. I expect to like learn math, science, or whatever, right? But I feel like more teachers should at least educate or try to at least talk about, the racism and the hardships, like kids in class, people of color in their class, they should give like outlets or, places to help or just talk about racism in general.
I feel like if we had some history being taught mainly, like, it could, how do I say this? It could like place a barrier between that hate, because it's like whenever they're being taught at home, they come to school and they learn history and everything like that, and then it could kind of change their perspective on the things that they think. And so I don't think school or our teachers play a role right now, but I think that they could.
So it'd be important for a teacher to teach your classroom, but also understand their students on a personal level and where they come from.
So they actually, in my opinion, play like a really important role, because our teachers and our mentors in our school, like our school boards, they hold such a high position of power that they are our teachers. So as people who are meant to be listening to them and taking what they say in and really digesting that, it's really important for our teachers and all of our role models in schooling really to be aware, and for them to be educating themselves as well with all the right information, because what they say really does have a long-lasting impact on everybody who they come in contact with. So, yeah.
The role that the school plays is more important for students who are not going to be directly challenged in this issue, and gives them a place of education that I think that is like really necessary, and it's way more than just what they have to teach us. Like, this is I feel like, in a sense, like, this is preparing people for the outside world more than we acknowledge it as a school, because whether we like it or not, given how things are kind of just shaped the way they are right now, students like us are going to have to deal with this issue, regardless of what we are or are not taught by our parents or by our teachers or by any other staff member. But those who learn and instead of experience, the role that our school could play is really teaching them to learn to be an ally, be helpful to like the cause, and then most importantly, be helpful to those students who are affected, who aren't just allies but are actually experiencing issues. And overall, that's going to create some more well-rounded students and a more well-rounded community that is more able to fight to make a difference.
Do you want to hear from your teachers or principals about the issues of race, police, and justice?
I think just because of everything that is going on, we should hear from them, and their opinions and their beliefs, whether we agree with them or not, because, I mean, we don't all need to have the same beliefs and agreements, but I do think that we should be able to hear what they have to say to like know, how do I say this? Like, if we relate with them or not.
Yeah, I want to have these conversations because it's like we need to have these hard conversations about stuff to fix things. So it's like we've been pushing it to the side, or like some teachers will be like, we'll be like in a history class and we'll start talking about race, but then they'll be like, no, let's not go too deep into it. But we need to go deep into it because it's like that's how we're gonna fix problems.
I think like racism needs to be a bigger part of schools. Like we talk, we have assemblies about like, the harms of vaping, like suicide and stuff like that. I think we should have like assemblies about racism and teach the whole school about it. I feel like racism should be a bigger topic that should be taught in school so we can educate, the youth and stuff.
Yeah, my take on, definitely teachers and principals should talk more about racism and police brutality and just overall everything that's happening right now, because I feel like it'd make more students interested in school in a way, and it'd make them feel more welcome to know that the problems that some of them face in their own personal life, they can talk about it with their teachers and their advisors, and they can get advice. And not only that, it's important because like racism and all the protesting that's going on, if we talk about it, learn about it, it's something that a lot of kids are passionate about, so they'll take it in more and they'll enjoy school more in a way. So not only are we getting awareness on racism, we're also involving students more and making them enjoy school more by talking about it.
I think it should be talked about in schools, and I think teachers can help to like educate people that don't understand, and help to like form better connections between not only the teachers and the students, but the students and the students. And it should be like a big topic that should be talked about in school.
Yeah, I think that it's really important. I would like to have heard from my teachers how they feel, what they think, because I would like to feel like my teachers take the time to understand me and understand the things that affect me, as well as every other student, not just me specifically, but like that they they get us, or they care about what we go through. And I think that's really important, because I think I heard it a lot that this is political, and so they can't speak about it. But I don't think that there's anything political about it. I think it's just supporting your students and what they're faced with, and I would like to see that kind of deflecting go away, and them instead just show us that they care.
Yeah, of course, I really want to see more discussion about it, even if it's an uncomfortable conversation for a lot of people to have. I don't think it should be uncomfortable, but because it feels like something people are uncomfortable to talk about it, we should be talking about it more, because bringing light to these subjects is really what we need, and we need more like really solid information to be like, we just really need to talk about all of this more, because the more that we push it away, the more it's going to come back in the future. And seeing the right people talk the right way about these issues, it would save a lot of people's lives. It would bring a lot more light to these subjects, and it would prevent from a lot of the violence happening now to happen in the future. So.
And so here's a moment for some self-reflection and even organizational reflection and evaluation. The two questions I have here kind of framing this conversation is, the first one is, how are the historically marginalized students doing under your leadership? The other question is, how are the historically marginalized students doing in your classroom? And before you answer any of those questions right now, it's important to do some reflection, some self-reflection, some self-evaluation. It's important to do that even with your peers and even your administrative teams. And at the same time, creating space for students to give us some insight and perspective on these questions is also really important. And so here are some follow-up questions. Do the historically marginalized students feel targeted? Do they feel celebrated? Are the Black children in your classroom being groomed for injustice? Are the Black children being groomed for mistreatment, degradation, and harm? Are they being groomed for low expectations and self-hate? Are the Spanish-speaking students feeling incompetent because English is their second language? Are the Native American indigenous students feeling isolated and ignored? Are the LGBTQ students afraid, invisible, and shamed? If we're not intentionally learning how to facilitate space for our historically marginalized students to feel empowered, gifted, valuable, celebrated, and supported, we are probably grooming them for more injustice. If we aren't intentionally researching authors, engineers, inventors, physicians, and historians that reflect their image, we are probably grooming them for injustice. A quick story or metaphor I like to share to really allow us to see this last point in another light is imagine you're at an event, right? And the event's over, and you're all going to take a group photo for the folks that showed up to this event. And so everybody lines up, you take a group photo. After you take the photo, you go home and they mail you a copy of the photo. When you get the photo, what's the first thing that you do? You look for yourself, exactly right. And so as you're looking for yourself, right, you want to see, once you find yourself, you're going to see, are your eyes closed? Are your eyes open? Are you looking the right way? Did you smile at the right time? How's your coordination, right, in your outfit, right? You're looking for yourself to make sure things look good. So imagine you don't see yourself. You're not in this photo. Well, what's the first thought that comes to mind? Yeah, for some of us, I know for me, being the optimist that I am, I'm gonna, assume that something's wrong with the photo, right? Like, somehow I got edited out or cropped out, or something's wrong with the photo. It's a bummer. but we move on. Now let's rewind that and imagine you go to several events with several groups with different people at different times, and every time you get home, they mail you the photo, and in every photo, you find yourself not in the picture. Somehow you've been cropped out, you've been edited out. Now what's the first thought that comes to mind? Yeah, at this point it's a little different, right? And so for me, the thing that comes to mind is I ask myself, what's wrong with me? Right? When it's repetitive and it's a pattern that you've been edited out of the photo, you are not reflected or depicted in this group picture. You no longer question kind of external factors for why that may be the case. You start to internalize this thought and this feeling that something's wrong with me. And so then when we think about our students, right, and we think about the way that we teach, the style that we teach in our curriculum, are our students reflected in the style and the curriculum of what we do every day as educators? Or are they constantly and repetitively and repeatedly edited out of the photo, edited out of the curriculum, edited out of the pedagogy? What is that communicating to them? And I think it's the same. They start to internalize, what's wrong with me? And so our last point before we bring our students in to close us out is this area of navigating the minefield. And we'll just go through a couple of points here. The first is recognize the reality of collective identity. If we're going to engage our students about topics of race and justice and equity and inclusion, which the point we made earlier, we're obliged to. We're obliged to engage. We have to recognize the reality of collective identity, which is to say your students can feel what others may experience, even though they don't experience it themselves. And I know we are a hyper individualized society, right? As Westerners and as Americans, we're hyper individualized, but at the same time, we understand the concept of we, right? We understand the concept of collective identity. And for your students, you have to realize and recognize that reality when it comes to issues of race and justice, that your students may not experience exactly what folks or individuals in other places may be experiencing it, but because of collective identity, it's real for them, right? And so we have to be able to recognize that reality, or else we'll approach the conversation as if it's not relevant to them, or we'll approach the conversation almost dismissing their heightened sense of passion or energy or even sadness and grief because it hasn't happened to them specifically. And in some cases, students see themselves in the experiences of others, right? So not a ton of time to unpack collective identity, but recognize that reality will be a healthy and right step in approaching these conversations. The second one is lean into healthy dialogue, right? So don't shut down opportunities to talk about race and then even experiences and perspectives from your students, right? Engage in what some may call academic discourse, right? So lean into healthy dialogue and don't fall into the trap of, well, I'm a math teacher, right? And so we don't talk about justice here in math. You want to avoid that pitfall and recognize that your students, even though they're learning different aspects of algebra or geometry or whatever the case may be, that readily on their mind are the things that they see in the streets and things that they see in the classroom and things that they see in the hallways and the cafeteria that are all wrapped around race and justice and equity and inclusion. And so regardless of the content area, lean into healthy dialogue. Create space for students to express the range of emotions and feelings that they may have, right? And here's another trap. Sometimes we see anger as negative, right? And we start to shut things down, right? For a lot of reasons, right? Socially, psychologically, we won't get into it a ton. But here's what I'll say. Anger is not a negative emotion. It's just an emotion. And in some cases, it's something that we should encourage, right? And facilitate students kind of able to verbalize and process how they're feeling. And then even so, without rushing them into the next emotion, right? Whether it be happiness or or contentment, whatever the case may be. Let's not rush students in and out of the emotions that make us uncomfortable. And so I'll say it again: anger is not a negative emotion, and we pay a lot of attention to the students that get angry or intense or passionate about these issues. And I think undue and inequitable attention, because I'm more concerned with the students who aren't angry about injustice. I'm more concerned with the students who could sit there and not say anything or not express any emotions, or worse, are indifferent or apathetic towards racism or racial injustice or exclusionary practices and ways, right? The students that could sit there and are apathetic or indifferent, I'm more concerned about those students. How are we helping them unlearn unconscious bias? How are we helping them unlearn racist ideas? Students, I'll say it this way: students shouldn't necessarily be able to navigate our educational system in their racist attitudes and biases and discriminatory practices go unchecked and or unlearned. Encourage your class to support students that speak out and speak up. And here's the thing, right? I hear a lot, especially when we're talking with classroom educators, a critique or kind of blame shifting to their next supervisor up, right? So admin, right? And then you talk to admin's blaming, critiquing district, right? And then you talk to district is blaming, critiquing board, right? And then you talk to board is blaming, critiquing community, right? And so forth and so on. We all do that. I'm in the military, and so at our various levels, from company to battalion to brigade to division to corps, we also can fall into that blame shifting game. And here's what I'll say: wherever you're at, take responsibility for your level of leadership, your level of authority. And so in that case, if that's facilitating your class to reshape and transform itself to support students that speak up, or in some cases, the next point, advocate for themselves, you can do that within your sphere of influence, right, and your position of power. And so do it in a way that students come alive and advocating for themselves and advocating for each other. Recognize that the way that the previous generation has done things hasn't resulted in the necessary change or improvement, right? And so this is a critique where the new generation critiques the older generation, and it happens almost every generational era. And so here's what I'll say: as you approach this conversation, a way to navigate the minefield is to not be on the defenses about that. Allow space for the new generation to think through and process their way and their ideas. And there's for sure room for intergenerational dialogue and generational collaboration. I support those efforts, but also make sure we're not just dismissing, degrading. Oh, you millennials, right? Is normally how that thing goes, right? And so let's not fall into that trap or hit that minefield. So recognize that the way the previous generation has done things, it hasn't produced the desired result or outcome to produce justice and fairness for every person. Okay, and let me wrap up here soon. Do not approach the conversations and topics as if we've always gotten this right as a school or as a district. And so another way to say this is approach it with extreme humility, because we haven't always gotten this right. We have done things or have been guilty of being complicit with racist ideas and practices and injustice. And so we have to approach the conversation, or in some ways, apathetic, indifferent, or invisible with having the conversation, right? That's been true for us at times, right? And we've had pockets of success. You hear that often. But the whole point here is to approach the conversation in these topics with humility. And another way, if you're a white educator, you for sure want to approach the conversation with humility when trying to talk about issues of race, right? to a classroom in a school district that's 70% students of color, right? And so you for sure want to approach it with humility, and in some cases, putting yourself in a position as a learner or a contributor may be the best approach for some of us, right? So let's keep that in mind. And then I'll say this: Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter. Do not fall into the All Lives Matter trap or protest to a legitimate protest, right? Like let's not fall into that trap. I'll tell you this: if any one of us comes out the gate saying all lives matter, again, throw your classroom management strategies in the garbage, right? Your ability to lead and influence your students will quickly be diminished if you stand on the All Lives Matter platform, because it's a counter protest to a protest. It's not a legitimate movement, right? And so here's what we're saying when we say Black Lives Matter, we are affirming a truth statement. Black Lives Matter. The right response to that, the only right response to that is yes, I agree. Black Lives Matter. They are valuable. They are worthy. They are gifted. They deserve dignity, right? And to celebrate or uplift a group of people is not the equivalent of degrading or diminishing another group of people. So to say Black Lives Matter is a truth statement that we get behind. And then, folks get tied up between Black Lives Matter, the organization, the LLC, and Black Lives Matter, the movement, right? And we are professionally trained, we are formally educated, and so we understand complexity, we understand nuance, and we can make the distinction between Black Lives Matter, the movement, and Black Lives Matter, the LLC. Right? Black Lives Matter, the movement, is this highly decentralized effort that in the face of injustice, in the face of a narrative that say Black people don't matter, Black people's lives aren't important, we say with affirmation and emphatically that Black lives do matter. Right? That's the movement, right? And that's the stand against injustice, right? In this pursuit of justice. And folks all over the globe are responding to that movement. Black Lives Matter, the LLC, it has a manifesto and a page of declarations that folks agree or disagree with, but the LLC is not organizing and coordinating the demonstrations and protests that's happening in our city right here in Lakewood. Those are local organizers, right, who are rallying behind the movement. The protests in Tokyo or Australia or Africa and in Europe, and then even South America and Central America, right? Protesting and demonstrating with hashtag Black Lives Matter, it's a result of the movement. It's not the LLC organizing, resourcing, and funding and coordinating all of those efforts across the globe. It's not possible. And so what you're seeing is a movement of folks who are standing and pursuing and calling for justice and affirming this truth statement, Black Lives Matter. And so that's what we're saying when we say Black Lives Matter. And then this last point here, navigating the minefield, right? Protest is very different than looting. And so let's just keep the main things. I think we hit on that point pretty hard earlier. Let's not get caught up talking about looting and destruction, because it's a diversion, it's a distraction. The main point and the main focus are those peaceful protests that's bringing the right amount of attention to a problem that's existed for a long time, and things have to change. So we're going to end our time hearing from students for the next 6 or 7 minutes. I want to thank you for your time tuning in to our session, Teaching Students During Civil Unrest.
All right, last one. What do your friends and peers want or need to hear from your teachers about racial tensions and protests?
I think one thing we need to hear one thing teachers should do and understand is that even though say if it was a white teacher, even though I'm a minority, I'm not asking for handouts, if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean? Like, all because I'm not white doesn't mean you have to suck up to me and not give me more homework than the white kid or whatever. No, teachers should understand it should be like an equal treatment of all students regardless of their skin color. But even though it's equal treatment, also understand that skin color is still a problem to some people, and that goes to racism. So for the teachers, they should understand the skin color of their student and the troubles that comes with it, but also not treat them any different than how do I say, like, treat them any different than how they would treat a white kid, you know?
I think it should be like, I feel like teachers should talk about it, because I've had a few arguments, like trying to convince people, about like racism and the problem. And it's always like, oh, about like, what about the right? And, I feel like teachers should talk about that, teach those people who don't see the bigger picture and only focus on like the right and stuff, and teach them that it's more than that. They're fighting for racism. It's not some small thing. That's what I think.
I think that it needs to be known that they can have somewhere to go to if they need to talk about being discriminated against, or in school too, like if it happens in school. I think they need to know that they can do that and it won't be shut down or anything like that, and that school is a safe place for them to be able to talk.
I would just say, like, be there for your students, and just like, I would say also just like call it out if you see it. Like, if you see like a coworker or something being like racist towards students, like, don't be afraid to call it out. Don't be afraid to call it out.
That in this place, they are safe. They won't be like given bias, and that they're whatever they're feeling, that they're valid, and that this is a place for combating ignorance and creating empathy, which I think is like a really powerful thing to tell a student and let them know. Combating ignorance and creating empathy, which I think is like a really powerful thing to tell a student and let them know.
This is a big one. So I feel like I want my teachers to talk more about the sides of, like, not what's being televised or what's being really intensely talked about on mass media, because a lot of the times there are things you see on alternate outlets like social media or anywhere else. You'll see different sides of the story, and I really think that we need to talk about more than just what's being like mass broadcasted, because it's really important to see every single side of this story, because this is one of like the biggest, in my opinion, like the biggest movements that I've lived through, and seeing my teachers talk about reasons why, like rioting. I know that it's really hard to see riots and that kind of violence in the world, but seeing why groups of people who have been oppressed and shut out by almost every system that has been built against them, seeing those systems come down is really important. And if people have to riot in order to get that seen and get that heard and get the message out, I know it's hard to hear and hard to see, but it's important to notice that, because it's how the systems are going to be dismantled and how they're going to be rebuilt in a more just way. So, yeah. Dismantled and how they're going to be rebuilt in a more just way. So.